In the midst of the harshest winter Chicago had seen in years, while the wind cut like a blade and snowflakes covered the streets like a blanket of silence, a man walked alone through an almost deserted park. From a distance, he looked more like a shadow, wrapped in a dark overcoat, eyes lost on the ice-covered ground. No one knew his name. No one cared about his fate. He was just another face among the many rushing through the city. But inside him was a deep emptiness, the kind of silence not even the loudest screams could fill. What he didn't know was that a little girl, wearing a coat far too big for her small frame and holding a teddy bear as worn out as her mother's dreams, was about to change his story forever. This is one of those stories that logic can't explain. There are no caped heroes, but there is something far more powerful. Unlikely encounters, courage disguised as affection, and a kind of love that blooms when no one believes in miracles anymore. Michael Donovan is 38 years old, CEO of one of the largest investment firms in the country, owner of a fortune big enough to buy any luxury, except a happy memory. Raised by his grandmother after losing his parents as a child, he learned early on that life charges too high a price for feelings. So he built walls around his heart, strong, high, impenetrable. The world saw a successful man, but inside, he only knew the echo of loneliness. Across town, in a small apartment with old plumbing and walls too thin for the cold that crept in, a mother fought every day to give her daughter the bare minimum. Ava was 35, with blonde hair always hastily tied up and green eyes heavy with exhaustion. She worked double shifts whenever she could, whispering silent prayers just to keep the rent paid. Emily, her 4-year-old daughter, was her light, her miracle, her reason to keep going, even when everything said to stop. And it was on a freezing Sunday, beneath a lead-gray sky and trees stripped bare by winter, that their paths crossed. Michael was at the park, as he often was when the weight of life became too much to bear. A quiet habit, almost an escape. He wasn't expecting anything, just wanted to walk in peace, far from the spotlights, the meetings, the numbers. But then, he heard a laugh, soft, innocent. And when he turned his head, he saw a little girl with red cheeks from the cold, holding a teddy bear by the ear and jumping in frozen puddles like they were magical lakes. She looked at him, without fear, without judgment, as if she could see something he no longer knew was there. And she asked, with the simplicity only a child can have, "Don't you have a family too?" It stopped him cold. Just a question. But it shattered something inside him, like a mirror breaking. From that moment on, everything changed. What started as a chance encounter in a snow-covered park would become a journey of healing, trust, and rebuilding. A real story, raw, human, where blood isn't the only thing that makes a family, where hope is born in the unlikeliest places, where love, no matter how quietly it arrives, has the power to warm even the coldest heart. This is the story of Michael, Ava, and little Emily. And it begins with a simple question asked by a 4-year-old girl on one of the coldest days of the year. The cold in Chicago didn't seem to affect Michael the way it did others. He walked through the frozen streets like a man wearing invisible armor. On the outside, he was as impeccable as ever, a suit beneath his coat, neatly styled hair, expensive shoes stepping on the snow like they didn't belong in that world. But inside, everything was silence. A heavy silence, one even the cruelest wind couldn't cut through. After the encounter with Emily in the park, something inside him had shifted. He didn't know what or why, but he felt it. That simple question, "Don't you have a family too?" echoed in his mind like a call he couldn't ignore. Back in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by marble, glass, and top-of-the-line technology, Michael took off his coat and sank into a leather armchair. The luxury around him clashed with the emptiness in the air. Everything was too quiet, too perfect, too cold. And there, in front of the burning fireplace, he allowed himself to remember. He remembered childhood in a modest suburban home, the smell of his grandmother's coffee every morning, the bedtime stories. He remembered the pain of his parents' funeral, the emptiness that never went away, the move into his grandmother's house, and her efforts to raise a broken boy with the few resources she had. She taught him to be strong, to rely on no one, to never show weakness. But she also became his only emotional anchor. And now, she was gone too. Michael had been at her bedside during her final days, holding her cold hand, listening to her whispered words. "You need to find something you can't buy, Michael. Something that fills your heart." Back then, he pretended to understand. But the truth was, he didn't even know where to begin. After she passed, he returned to his routine with near-mechanical efficiency. He woke early, led meetings, signed contracts, moved millions. But at the end of each day, all that remained was silence. No siblings, no close friends, no one waiting for him at home. The world applauded his business success, but no one knew the loneliness that consumed him inside. He had convinced himself that it was the price of success, that emotional ties only got in the way, that affection was a weak currency in the market where he operated. But Emily's question, so innocent, hit like an arrow and brought all his walls crumbling down. "Don't you have a family too?" He had never spoken about it with anyone, always kept his pain guarded like a shameful secret. But now, something was changing. For the first time, it didn't feel wrong to admit it hurt, that the emptiness followed him like a shadow, that the void, despite all the millions, still made him feel small. He stayed up all night. Thoughts of the little girl kept him awake, the curious face, the wide, attentive eyes, the oversized coat, the worn-out teddy bear. That child had nothing, and yet she carried a light he had long since lost. What could possibly make that little girl smile in the cold? What made her believe that someone like him didn't have a family? Michael had never been one to believe in coincidences. But this felt like more than chance. It was as if life, after so many years, was finally offering him a second chance. A chance to feel again, to connect, to build something money could never buy. He stood slowly, walked to the window, and watched the snow fall silently over the city. The world outside went on, untouched. But inside him, the ice had begun, ever so slightly, to melt. 2 days after that meeting in the park, Michael was still thinking about Emily. The way she had appeared in his life, with nothing in her hands and everything in her spirit, hope, sweetness, courage, wouldn't leave his mind. He remembered her tiny voice, the way she clutched her teddy bear like it was the most precious thing in the world. And that question, the one that had reopened a long-forgotten wound in his chest. No matter how much he tried to focus on the numbers and the meetings, something inside him had shifted. It was as if that little girl had lit a candle inside the void. And it was on that cold morning, under a gray sky with traffic more chaotic than usual, that a colorful envelope was discreetly dropped off at the reception desk of the building where Michael worked. The receptionist, unsure what to do, took the elevator up to the top floor and handed it to the CEO himself with an awkward smile. It was a purple envelope, with a hand-drawn star in pencil and his name written in shaky letters. Mikhail, with an A instead of an H. Michael opened it, curious, and found a handmade invitation, a piece of paper folded in half, with colorful drawings of balloons, crooked hearts, and a poorly drawn slice of pizza in the corner. In the center, in large, innocent letters, "Do you want to come to my birthday party? There will be pizza and cake. It's near Aunt Lou's Cafe, Saturday at 3. Signed, Emily and Teddy." He stared at the invitation for a long time. Something so simple, so improvised, and yet so powerful. That little girl truly expected him to come. Someone she'd seen only once, and still, she chose him. Michael didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to tell himself it was just a child being kind, that it didn't mean anything. But another part, quieter, deeper, knew it meant exactly the opposite. That little girl was offering something no one else ever had. A place, a piece of affection, a seat at someone's table, even if it was just for pizza and a simple cake. On Saturday, he woke up early, paced back and forth in his living room, unsure. Put on his coat, took it off, put it on again. Until finally he left the building, got into his car and asked the driver to drop him off near Aunt Lou's Cafe, a small corner shop tucked between old buildings, forgotten by people always in a rush. When he arrived, there was no party hall, no shiny balloons. But he heard laughter coming from a side alley, shielded from the wind by a makeshift tarp. He walked slowly toward it and saw, between stacked cardboard boxes and blankets covering the cold ground, a small gathering of children, 3 adults, and an improvised table with an open pizza box and a chocolate cake with sprinkles in the center. Emily ran to him the moment she saw him. "You came!" she shouted, her eyes sparkling. She grabbed his hand with confidence and pulled him to the table, as if presenting the most important guest of the day. Everyone looked at him, curious, but no one asked questions. They just made space. He sat down, a little awkwardly, and accepted a slice of pizza served on a napkin. In that moment, something broke inside him. Or maybe, something began to form. It wasn't the place or the food. It was the way he was welcomed, as if he belonged, as if for a few moments he had returned to childhood and could finally breathe without armor. Michael looked at Emily, who was laughing with a bit of cake on the corner of her mouth, and realized he had accepted more than just an invitation to a party. He had taken the first step onto a new path. The smell of cold pizza and simple chocolate still lingered in the air when Michael realized that this birthday, improvised and unpretentious, had marked more than a moment. It had taken root inside him. As he watched Emily play with the other children under the worn tarp swaying in the wind, his eyes were drawn to a woman gathering paper plates and cleaning up the remnants of the little party with tired, careful hands. It was Ava. She wore a second-hand, threadbare coat, and her long, wavy blonde hair was tied up in a messy knot. Her green eyes, though marked by deep dark circles, held a calm glow. When she looked at Michael for a brief moment, it felt like 2 worlds collided. There was something there. A quiet, subtle force, yet completely undeniable. "You must be Michael," she said, offering her hand with a gentle smile. "Emily hasn't stopped talking about you." He shook her hand firmly but respectfully, surprised by how natural she was. There was no flattery, no probing curiosity, just a steady gaze from someone who'd lived too much to be impressed by titles or tailored suits. Ava was unlike any woman he had ever met. They sat on wooden crates beside the tarp, holding nearly frozen cups of orange juice. The conversation started cautiously, with comments about the weather, about how happy Emily was, until little by little, they began to open up more. Ava shared that she had organized the party with donations from neighbors and a food voucher she'd used to buy the pizza and cake. She said she didn't want her daughter to grow up thinking that love depended on money, that she tried every day to teach Emily the value of small things, even when the world offered nothing but absence. Michael listened in silence. Every word she spoke was like a mirror, reflecting back his own emptiness, not of possessions, but of meaning. Ava didn't complain, didn't ask for help, didn't play the victim. She simply existed, with dignity, fighting every day to give her daughter a sliver of normalcy. As they talked, Emily ran up to them with her teddy bear, climbed onto her mother's lap, and fell asleep right there, her head resting on Ava's shoulder. Michael looked at the scene like someone witnessing a quiet miracle. It was simple, but filled with love. Ava, noticing his gaze, gave a small smile. She gets attached too easily, must be from needing affection. Or maybe she knows how to recognize a good heart, Michael replied without thinking. Ava looked away, unsure what to say. As the cold grew harsher, Michael offered them a ride home. Ava politely declined, saying she preferred to walk. "Emily likes to see the Christmas lights in the windows," she explained. He respected that. But before they said goodbye, she thanked him. Not for showing up, not for the gesture, but for the respect he showed her daughter. That phrase stayed with him. In the days that followed, Michael couldn't get Ava and Emily out of his mind. It wasn't pity, it was admiration. It was as if he had discovered a new kind of strength, the kind found in those who face the world with empty hands, but hearts full of love. For the first time, he wanted to be close, not to save anyone, but to learn, to allow himself to feel, to remember who he was before he became just a name on an office plaque. That day, beneath a makeshift tarp in a cold alleyway, an unlikely family had begun to form, not by blood, but by soul. The days following the party were quietly transformative for Michael. He continued with his business routine, still wore the same tailored suits, still sat at the head of long boardroom tables. But something in his eyes had changed. A subtle glow, almost imperceptible, like there was now something or someone waiting for him on the other side of the city. And that thought made everything feel less barren. Not knowing exactly how to proceed, he found ways to help Ava and Emily. In his own way, discreetly, without fanfare, without crossing the dignity he so deeply admired in her. The first help came in the form of an anonymous donation dropped off at the community clinic where Ava volunteered for a few shifts as an assistant. Medical supplies, hygiene items, even toys for the kids. Ava didn't know who had sent them, but she smiled with relief as she opened the boxes. Later, Michael reached out to a trusted doctor friend and scheduled a private appointment for Emily, who had been struggling with a persistent cough. He paid for everything in advance, instructed the doctor not to mention his name, and left the clinic's address along with a note. For the health of what matters most. Ava hesitated. She was suspicious, but when she realized it was for Emily, she didn't have the strength to say no. The little girl was examined, treated, and within a few days was feeling much better. On a rainy morning, Ava found a bag hanging discreetly on the doorknob of her apartment. Brand new winter clothes, perfectly sized for Emily, accompanied by a small jar of honey and chamomile tea. Inside, a card with a single phrase, "For cold nights that deserve a bit of comfort." Ava held the card in her hands for a long time, feeling a mix of gratitude and discomfort. She knew it was Michael, but she couldn't understand why he was doing all this without asking for anything in return. Proud by nature, Ava had always avoided depending on anyone. Life had taught her that anything gained too easily usually came at a steep price. But with Michael, it was different. He didn't intrude, didn't impose, didn't try to control. He was simply there, a silent presence, respectful and consistent. And little by little, without realizing it, she began to trust him. One Sunday afternoon, he showed up unexpectedly at the park where Emily was playing. He brought a small bag of cheese bread and a thermos of hot chocolate. Ava hesitated when she saw him approaching, but Emily's smile was so immediate and joyful that she couldn't bring herself to push him away. They sat together on a park bench, the three of them, and talked as if they were old friends. Emily laughed out loud, her face smudged with chocolate, while Michael made up stories about bears that lived in glass buildings and were better at math than he was. Ava watched in silence, seeing, perhaps for the first time, her daughter laugh with someone other than her, someone who wouldn't disappear the next day, someone who wasn't there out of pity, but by choice. And that touched her in a way she didn't know how to name. By the end of the afternoon, as Emily fell asleep on the bench with her head on Ava's lap, Michael gently covered her with his coat and stood to leave. Before going, he looked into Ava's eyes and said, his voice low and sincere, "I don't want to be just another person passing through your lives. I'm not here to fix anything. I just want to walk beside you if you'll let me." Ava didn't answer right away. She simply nodded, gripping her daughter's tiny hand tightly. For the first time in a long while, she felt that maybe trust was possible again. That night, the sky was clear and full of stars, a rare contrast to Chicago's gray winter. Michael suggested taking Ava and Emily to a quiet part of the city where the lights didn't drown out the sky, just to see the stars. Emily slept in the back seat, wrapped in a soft blanket, while Ava and Michael walked down a narrow sidewalk in a peaceful neighborhood, hands in their pockets, their silence filled only by the distant sound of the wind. They stopped near an open field, where a few bare trees swayed gently in the cold breeze. There, beneath a sky dotted with stars like scattered pieces of light, Ava began to talk. Not like before, not with controlled phrases or cautious words. She simply spoke, like someone opening a door that had been locked for far too long. She told him she had gotten pregnant with Emily at 30, after a troubled relationship with a man who promised everything and in the end took away what little she had. She told him about nights she cried from hunger, hiding her empty stomach from her daughter. She admitted she had thought of giving up more than once, but every time she looked into Emily's eyes, the world took on a different meaning. She revealed that she had lived in shelters, had been judged, ignored, underestimated, and that she had never asked for help because she feared being seen as weak. Michael listened to every word without interrupting. He looked at Ava as if seeing a warrior camouflaged beneath a worn-out coat. When she finished speaking, he didn't respond right away. He simply took a deep breath and, for the first time, removed his own armor. He told her about his lonely childhood, the pain of losing his parents in an accident he could barely remember, the grandmother who raised him with what little she had, and the day she died in his arms. He shared how, despite all the luxury, he had never known the comfort of a hug when coming home. How he learned to succeed because it was the only way to survive. That he built wealth trying to fill a void that only grew. And that lately, he had been afraid that he no longer knew what real love was. There was a silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence full of understanding, as if both their wounds had found shelter in one another. Ava moved a little closer, and Michael extended his hand slowly, like someone offering support, not intrusion. She took it, and in that simple gesture, something between them was sealed. The friendship born that night was built on truth, not empty promises, not appearances. It was a bond between two survivors, two people who, in different ways, had seen the worst the world could offer, but still carried within them the quiet ability to believe again. In the days that followed, Michael began visiting Ava's small apartment more frequently. Not as a guest, but as a presence. He helped with chores, picked Emily up from school, sat on the floor to draw with her. Ava, little by little, allowed herself to trust. She began to understand that accepting help wasn't weakness, that leaning on someone wasn't giving up her freedom, but sharing the weight she'd carried alone for far too long. And Emily, with her radiant innocence, was the bond between them. The little girl who, without realizing it, had stitched two broken hearts together with invisible threads of affection. She smiled more, slept better, as if she could already feel that something was changing inside their home. Something quiet, but immense. Ava and Michael didn't speak of love yet, but there was love in everything they did. In the glances exchanged in the kitchen, in the shared coffees at dawn, in the way they cared for each other. And that was enough. Because some connections don't need words. They just need space to grow. And in that small old apartment, there was finally space for a new beginning. The quiet rhythm they had built over the past few months finally felt like life was settling into a new pace. Ava had returned to working a few shifts at the community clinic. Emily attended the neighborhood preschool with the peaceful smile of someone who felt safe. And Michael split his days between boardrooms and discreet visits to the apartment the two called home. That simple routine brought him a kind of peace he had never known in the glass towers where he ruled empires. But that calm was suddenly shattered. On a cloudy morning, as Ava was getting ready to leave for work, an official vehicle pulled up in front of the building. Two agents from Child Protective Services climbed the stairs and knocked firmly on her door. Suspicious, Ava opened it. In just a few minutes, the words she heard froze her blood. They had received an anonymous report about poor living conditions and were opening a case to evaluate Emily's custody. Ava tried to explain, to show that her daughter was healthy, cared for, happy. But the agent's trained eyes scanned the small space, the peeling walls, the shared mattress, the nearly empty fridge, and recorded everything with the cold precision of protocol. She begged for time, for a chance to prove herself. But by the end of the visit, she was told the case would be reviewed urgently, and depending on the judge's decision, Emily could be temporarily placed in a shelter until the situation was resolved. When Michael got Ava's call, her voice was barely a whisper, choked with tears. He dropped everything, meetings, appointments, the world, and rushed to her. When he arrived, he found Ava sitting on the floor, Emily asleep in her lap, as if the simple weight of her daughter was the last thread of hope keeping her standing. He said nothing. He simply knelt beside them and, with the calm resolve of someone used to facing battles, promised, "They're not taking Emily from you. I won't let that happen." In the hours that followed, Michael mobilized lawyers, gathered documents, contacted social workers. He built a dossier with medical records, preschool reports, statements from the clinic where Ava worked. He collected testimonies from neighbors, teachers, and community members. Every detail became a piece of the truth. Ava was a present, loving, responsible mother. Poverty was not neglect. It was the result of a system that had never offered her a hand. On the day of the hearing, Ava arrived at court dressed simply, but with her head held high. Michael walked beside her, sober, steady. As they entered the courtroom, she gripped his hand so tightly her fingers trembled. They sat side by side, facing the judge. During the proceedings, the prosecutor presented the inspection report and recommended temporary custody as a protective measure. But then, Michael's lawyer stood. He handed the judge a complete file and, with a clear and firm speech, revealed that Michael Donovan, a respected businessman, was willing to assume the role of legal provider for the family, guaranteeing financial and emotional stability until Ava could fully rebuild her life. The judge listened in silence. He looked at Ava, then at Emily, who was sleeping against Michael's shoulder, her head covered by a blue knit cap. And after a few minutes that felt like hours, he delivered the decision. Emily's custody would remain with Ava. But now, under supervision and with Michael's official support as a joint guardian, Ava cried, but not out of fear. She cried out of relief, out of gratitude, out of love. As they left the courtroom, Michael gently held her hand. Ava looked into his eyes, and without saying a word, he knew. She trusted him completely, and for the first time she didn't feel alone in the fight. They had won. Together. After the victory in court, life began to take on a new rhythm for Michael, Ava, and Emily. The winter chills still lingered in Chicago, but inside that small apartment, something new was warming the space. Hope. Fulfilling his promise, Michael offered his home for Ava and Emily to live in temporarily. It was a spacious place, quiet, full of windows that let in sunlight even on the grayest days. For Ava, who had always lived cramped in tiny spaces, it felt like a distant dream. For Emily, it was as if the world had finally opened up in brighter colors. The first days were difficult. Ava felt uncertain stepping into a space that wasn't hers, and the shadow of the past seemed to creep into every corner. But Michael was patient, offering support without pressure. He understood that trust and rebuilding couldn't be rushed. Slowly, Ava began to smile more often, and Emily started to explore the new bedroom where she could now play and sleep in peace. Motivated by the sense of safety in that temporary home, Ava decided to resume the nursing course she had dropped years before. Between shifts at the community clinic and evening classes, she worked hard to build a better future for herself and her daughter. Michael admired her quiet determination and offered to care for Emily whenever Ava needed time to study or work. Life together became natural. It wasn't a relationship marked by haste or unrealistic expectations, but a partnership built on respect and mutual support. Michael, who once isolated himself in a world of numbers and cold decisions, discovered the richness of small gestures, making breakfast for Emily, helping with school books, listening to Ava talk about her dreams with genuine attention. Emily blossomed in this new reality. The little girl who once hid behind a worn-out teddy bear now ran through the halls of the house, her laughter chasing away the shadows of difficult months. The constant presence of Michael and the tireless love of Ava created a space where childhood could finally flourish, without fear, without absence. But more than material security, what truly transformed that house was the dignity each person felt in being respected and valued. Ava was no longer a mother fighting the world alone. She was part of a family that chose to walk together. Michael was no longer a lonely businessman. He was a man learning to be present, to feel, to give himself to something worth far more than money. On quiet nights, when Emily was already asleep, they would sit in the living room with warm cups of tea, talking about the future, about fears and hopes. There were no grand promises, just the certainty that they would be there, side by side, facing whatever came. The transformation wasn't immediate, nor perfect. There were difficult days, doubts, fears. But with every obstacle overcome, the bond between them grew stronger. Like a garden weathering storms, that unlikely family was growing, rooted in love, born from respect, trust, and solidarity. The future, once uncertain and dark, now shone with the promise of new beginnings, simple victories, and days worth living. Together, Michael, Ava, and Emily weren't just building a home. They were building a life where hope finally had room to bloom. 6 months had passed since that harsh winter in Chicago, when Michael, Ava, and Emily began transforming their lives amidst challenges and uncertainty. The cold was now just a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of sunny days that filled the city with life and promise. On that special morning, the house that once felt like only a temporary refuge was preparing for an event that symbolized much more than a simple ceremony: the wedding of Michael and Ava. The celebration was simple and intimate, yet full of meaning. Close friends, neighbors who had witnessed their journey, and a few people who had played a role along the way, gathered in the sunlit garden to honor that moment. Wildflowers adorned the space, and a delicately set table with homemade cake and fresh juice stood as a reminder of the hard times, now transformed into joy. Emily, wearing a white dress that matched her radiant smile, ran through the garden, sharing laughter and hugs. The little girl who once faced freezing nights with a worn teddy bear was now the star of a new story, a story of love, protection, and a true family. She held her mother's hand tightly while looking at Michael with the kind of trust and joy only a truly loved child can express. When the moment came, Michael and Ava exchanged vows, simple, heartfelt words that spoke of resilience, of respect, of a partnership built brick by brick, day by day. The silence that followed their promises was filled with laughter, applause, and the emotional gazes of everyone present. It was a victory beyond formality, a triumph of enduring love, of bonds that grew stronger in the face of adversity. But their story didn't end there. Motivated by a desire to give back everything they had received, Michael and Ava founded the Light Haven Foundation, an institution dedicated to helping single mothers and children in vulnerable situations. The foundation offered not just shelter, but emotional support, education, and opportunities for these families to rebuild their lives with dignity and hope. Light Haven quickly became a community landmark. Children who had once faced neglect now had a safe place to play and learn. Mothers, burdened by the weight of survival, found support to return to school, find jobs, and, most importantly, believe in a better future. Michael, who had once lost himself in the world of business, found in the foundation a purpose beyond profit and success. Ava, whose strength had been forged through adversity, now led social projects with an open heart and unshakable determination. And Emily, with her bright eyes and contagious smile, became the living inspiration behind every story of transformation that unfolded there. On Emily's birthday, a small party was held at the Light Haven Hall. Colorful balloons, a table filled with sweets, and at the center, a cake decorated with sunflowers, the flower symbolizing light and renewal. Emily blew out the candles with the help of her parents, surrounded by friends, laughter, and a love that seemed to fill every corner of the space. As the candles went out, Michael looked at Ava and his daughter with a feeling no words could express. It was gratitude for finding a family when he least expected it. It was hope for a future where no one would have to face loneliness or poverty alone. It was love, the kind of love that transforms lives and builds legacies. And so, through laughter and tears, ends this story that began with an unlikely encounter in a frozen park, with a simple question from a 4-year-old girl. A question that lit a spark, the spark of hope, of courage, and of true love. Michael, Ava, and Emily proved that even in the harshest circumstances, it's possible to begin again, to rebuild, and to create a future where warmth, love, and compassion always prevail. Because in the end, true wealth lies in the human connections we form, the ones that stay, even when everything else falls apart. So, what did you think? Did this heartwarming story melt your heart even in the cold streets of Chicago? If this journey of love, resilience, and fresh beginnings touched you, don't let that warm feeling slip away. Go ahead and hit that like button, like you're holding little Emily's hand at that sweet improvised birthday party, with all the love in the world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do us a favor. Click that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because here we bring you stories that inspire, move, and remind you that a new beginning is always just around the corner.